But what I would like to do now is pass you on to Martin Empson from the Campaign Against Climate Change. Martin.
I'll assume the applause is for the fighters in South Africa who actually are inspiring all of us with their struggle against the system. But I want to try and explain and discuss a little bit about what we do as activists, as campaigners, as trade unionists who are worried and concerned about the environment. Why is it, for instance, that there are 150, 200 people here and not 10,000 people? When you listen to people like Kevin Anderson at the start and you realise the scale of the problem that we face, the absolute catastrophe that the planet faces, that we face as humans. And I think part of the answer to that, I can answer through my own experience, because what have I been doing for the last week? I went to a meeting against the bedroom tax. I went to a demonstration against the EDL. I went to a meeting at work about pay strikes and in local government. And I think all of us, all activists, are feeling that pressure at the moment. There's so much out there. There's so many things to organise around. There's so many things to protest. People mentioned today the FBU, the Firefighters Union, who are holding a demonstration in Hackney and in Islington today to keep open their fire stations. And really, I want to try and understand, how can we, as environmentalists and activists, interact and relate with everyone else and with a wide layer of people when we've all got these pressing things. I mean, we know how bad things are going to get with the environment, but actually that's something you perhaps can worry about in a month's time when you've stopped the bedroom tax, or you've stopped the eviction, or you've marched and you've organised in your streets against the cuts and so on. And I think part of the way that we can do that is by arguing very, very clearly that the problem and the solutions are actually very similar. The problem, what the system that is cutting jobs, the system that is closing fire stations and libraries and schools and sacking people and closing buildings like this, is doing it because of profits. It's doing it because they are only interested in the dollars and the pound signs. And we see that, I think, very clearly when we look at one of the wonderful graphs, a very interesting graph that Kevin Anderson showed right at the beginning. I don't know if people remembered it. It's a graph that gradually goes up and then it accelerates up as emissions, total emissions, increase. And he put on it a number of markers, and they're very interesting markers because they're all markers that mark points when the global governments, the politicians got together and they said, we're going to do something about the environment. And along that way, even despite all the rhetoric and the talking, despite all the promises and the arguments from the people at the top, those emissions continue to rise. And I was lucky enough, perhaps with other people in this room, to have gone to the Earth Summit that took place in Rio de Janeiro about this time last year. And one of the interesting things at that was not so much what happened outside. There were some fantastic demonstrations and so on, but what our government did when it went along. Nick Clegg, he was the representative when, and he proposed at the conference that we needed more of what they called natural capital. And I'm sure people may have heard of this concept. It's where you parcel up the planet, the country, the landscape, the natural world into chunks that can be offered at a price. So that, for instance, the former environmental minister, Caroline Spillman, could say that the value of a tree in an urban setting in Britain is £38,000. And what's the logical consequence of this? It means that if you chop a tree down, you can compensate someone, you can pay some money to allow for the fact that you've chopped a tree down. It's the market mechanisms gone mad. It's the justification of the attack on the natural world and the environment in the interest of profit. It's very similar to what they're doing with austerity. Just as an interesting aside, the Irish government has actually put a price on the contribution of earthworms to their economy. It's €245 billion. And if you want to think about a world that's gone mad, it's when you've started to put a price on the value of earthworms. And really, I think that's the solution, isn't it? Because actually what we have to do as environmentalists is not to go and hector or moralise. And when you see the graphs, and you see the statistics and you hear the scientists, actually it's very easy to go to people and say, why don't you wake up and why won't you come and do something? But actually I think it's very dangerous that we can do that, because you can end up pushing those trade unionists and those campaigners away from you. And what we need to do is to find a way to work more closely with them. And I think the FBU is a very interesting example. The FBU put out a report last week where they point out that the government has no strategy to make it a legal requirement for firefighters to deal with floods. What does this really mean? This means, of course, that the government has no strategy to deal with climate change. Actually, it would be very easy for environmental activists to go to any fire station in the country and say, we want a campaign to keep your fire station open because we see the importance of your jobs and your trade union members to the fight against climate change. We can see it in the bedroom tax. it wouldn't be insane for an environmentalist to go along to a meeting and campaign over the bedroom tax and say what we also need is new houses built with proper insulation, with trade union labour, sustainable housing for the future generations and so on. And the job, I think, and it's not always an easy one, it's not always automatic, and sometimes the link isn't necessarily there at all, but really to start to integrate the question of climate jobs and the question of environment into the wider struggles and campaigns that our members and our campaigners are involved in. I think there's a real urgency to do some of those things. But really I want to finish with a point, two points. One of the things I think is very crucial, particularly for trade unionists, is the way, and people should go over and talk to the activists on the Share Action stall over there, the way that many of our trade union pension funds are invested in carbon corporations and so on. And I think we need a bit of a campaign in the trade union movements for disinvestment out of that. We don't want our money invested in corporations that are pouring carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and actually we want it invested in things that can benefit ordinary people. But the final 2 points really, I mentioned this very early on, but I do think we should take some excitement from the fact that the people, the men and women who are demonstrating and occupying and challenging the corrupt, anti-democratic, brutal regime in Turkey did so because a few of them started off by protesting against the chopping down of trees. If there isn't one better example of how environmental issues can start to interrelate with wider questions of society and economics and democracy, then I don't know one other. And perhaps if we're looking for a final thing, we can all go away from here. I'm from Manchester. On the 29th of September, the Tory party has the audacity to come and have its annual conference in Manchester. It's amazing, they haven't got a single councillor, let alone an MP in the city, but they seem to come back all the time. And there's a demonstration been called by various trade union groups and anti-cuts organisations and the TUC and the Trades Council and so on. I think it would be really, really good if the environmental movement turned up to that en masse, not simply to protest at the Tories, because it's really easy to do that, not simply to say that we want action over climate change, but start to build a relationship with those trade unionists and those activists who are fighting over all the other issues that are dear to our hearts, so that we can move together united and change things for the better and for the future.
Thank you. We're going to do questions and contributions from the floor, and we may have time for the speakers to come back at the end. We may not. But we're going to have to be quick. But first, Peter from Biofuel Watch. Quickly.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for being given 3 minutes to address bioenergy at this conference. Yesterday I was at the launch in Parliament of the 8th campaign, and I don't want to disparage Oxfam or ActionAid, but compared to this, it was like a Mooney wedding. They were saying, we're going to show those people in government what we can do. And I don't think they're capable of doing very much. I will return to that. But following on from Kevin Anderson's reference to